Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Kirk Thompson, where he shares about what it means for him to have a deep relationship with Jesus as it pertains to being more than a social club and where Jesus is taking him as he looks back on his life's journey. So let's get into the conversation today. Kirk, thank you for taking time to be a guest on our podcast and share a little bit about you and Jesus with our audience. So thank you for being here. As we begin, can you share a little bit about the fact of you have played the guitar? You don't play it as much as you used to, but can you share a little bit about what got you into guitar and a bit of that journey?
Sure. By the way, I don't play it. I haven't been playing it at all. But when I was a kid, I wanted to play guitar. So my folks bought me a cheap guitar, and I went to guitar lessons, and that didn't work out so well. I was a kid, obviously. And so I kept that guitar. I didn't play it, but it was in the back of my closet for years. And I grew up, left home, got my own apartment. And one day, I've always been a music lover. And I was listening to some of my favorite groups. A group I happened to be listening to at that time was a group called Marshall Tucker Band. And I had a harmonica, an old C harmonica, and I pulled it out just for giggles. And a C harp, that song is done in G, and a C harp would be a cross harp. And I picked that up, and I was able to play cross harp to that song. Well, believe it or not, I was like, this is really cool. So I found other songs that were in the key of G, and I was able to do the same thing. The song, in fact, was Can't You See by Marshall Tucker Band. Some of the people that may watch this they might relate to that song, but and so with that, I started sort of wanting to put my hand back in music, and I got my little cheap guitar out that was very difficult to play, by the way, even with a strong hand at it. But
what do you mean? Why was it difficult?
It was cheap. The action was really high. It was hard to fret, and it just was painful to play. And my fingers, of course, were not calloused in any way. Mm-hmm. So I started playing, and I recognized that this song had three chords that I was able to play. So I played along with the very same song. And for some reason, it was at that point that I realized that, hey, I can do this, and I like it. So, and at the time, I'm going to venture to say that I was probably 20 years old. And so from that point, I continued to play. Periodically, I would if I went to a party, I would take my guitar and make a fool out of myself, singing and playing songs. But I didn't care because I really liked doing that. And from that, I was able to find myself into a couple of bar bands over the years. And we practiced as a group, tried to, do the best we could at songs. And there were some very talented people that I got a chance to play with, much more talented than I was. But I learned, and I tried, and I liked it. I guess I don't know if I liked the showmanship of it or what, but the music was great, and I loved that. So I did that for quite some time. different groups. Some paid well, some paid badly. Some didn't pay at all. But, I wasn't in it for the pay. I never thought I would be a rock star. Would have loved it, but no. And so from that point, I did buy myself a guitar that was still not an expensive guitar, but was a very nice acoustic guitar. My old Sigma. And that was fun. And I literally, through the years with that, I even wore the case out. I had to get a different case because the old one fell apart. Probably living in the rain too often. And so I went through, got married. It became less of a part of my life. But I did reach points at time when I would play a lot. And if I didn't necessarily play publicly, it was privately. In fact, I would go to the basement and play. And I even started writing some songs and had quite an I'd say 10 to 15 songs, but they all kind of tended to be Christian songs. They tended to be spiritual songs. And at the time we were very active and were getting active in this church. In fact, my ex-wife and my family, and so I was into it. That was probably one of my favorite times because I really was able to. I found myself getting better, which will happen, and I guess from that point there was a period of time when I came and started playing on the praise team, and I did that for quite a number of years, and I really enjoyed that until I had the stroke that I had, and it really was hard work for me to get back to the point where I could even come close to being able to play it. But to be honest with you, it became more stressful, and I lost the joy of it, and I decided, well, this is a younger man's gig. I'm going to leave it up to the younger people, and I stepped away. And the only regret I have from that is my guitars remain sitting in their cases. And there's not probably a day goes by that I don't think, I should go in there and pull one out. And I don't do it. I don't know why. Maybe it's been a few years. When I was traveling, I had both my guitars. They were up above the cab in their place, and I periodically would pull them out. Of course, I was still playing on the praise team at the time. So when I would come back in the summers, I would, get back on the schedule. But
well, speaking of that, you talk about traveling. So you spent considerable time, basically traveling in your RV. Can you share a little bit about what moved you to do that? What you liked about that experience, and what you maybe didn't like?
Yeah, this is kind of like this would be my tractor. Hi, Dan. Yeah, I let me just kind of go over a little bit of the chronology of things. I chose to retire at the end of the year. I can't remember. I think it was about, it might have been 2017. I could be off a year. And I let my HR person know that I'm planning on retiring on December 31st. And I'm going to take 5 weeks of vacation, which I have saved up ahead of that, and with holiday pays and everything, and I'm going to leave, and then I was going to leave right after Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, and be done, but still working, basically on vacation. And my HR person, bless her heart, she looked into some things and was able to come back to me with a deal that I couldn't refuse. And she said, and basically it allowed me to retire and leave on the very day that I planned on leaving. But there was a nice little bonus, is that they continued my salary for a time. So, but I didn't have to argue the vacation thing or anything. So it was a great thing. So I left that year. I retired the day before Thanksgiving was my last day. And the day after Thanksgiving, I hit the road. And I spent 965 consecutive nights in my RV.
How many again?
965.
Okay.
Just shy of 3 years. And the reason I stopped is because Sam and Kelsey had bought their home, and they were moving into their own home. And I didn't trust leaving my home empty in this day and age. And also, it was becoming harder on my body after 965 consecutive nights. So that's kind of the chronology of things, okay? So when I left the day after Thanksgiving, I had a destination in mind in about a week and a half, and I was going to be with some friends of mine. They were traveling, we traveled together. And my rig was brand new. I was towing my Jeep, so I was self-contained and everything, but I was a little nervous about just busting out on my own. And so we traveled, and we actually made our way over the next week down to Texas, to the hill country of Texas. And we spent, I think it was 3 weeks there over Christmas. And they then went south, and I went west. And from that point on, I always traveled alone. I would periodically hook up with people, other people that were travelers, and we would say, hey, let's get together here. But for the most part, I traveled alone. And for that period of time, I would say that I made it. I was at one time located in the an hour south of Orlando, Florida, and at another period of time in that 965 days, I was at the upper top of the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. They give you a feel for how the breadth of the traveling. And through all of that, I'm not going to go into details too much, but I spent a week in New Orleans. I spent a month traveling along the top of the Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, it was a year after the big hurricane that they had there, so I couldn't go where I wanted to, which was right down to the coast. I had to stay up north. But, and I guess I had this motto. I've maybe told you this before, but it isn't a motto. It's more of a just a thing that I would say, because people would ask me, well, how do you decide where you're going to go, or how long you're going to stay there? And my reaction to that was, I go whichever direction I'm going, and if I like where I'm at, I stay until I don't. And then I would move on to the next place. And sometimes I had to stay until I was well past being ready to move on. An example of that would have been the last winter that I actually traveled. I was at a super nice, one of my favorite places, RV park up in the high desert of New Mexico, but in the southern part of the state, sort of. But it was like 15 to 20 miles on gravel to get there, and which was a little bit jarring in an RV, needless to say. But that last year, in fact, I stayed there several times in my travels. If I would come by there, that was always one of my favorite places to stop and stay until I was ready to go. Mm-hmm. Now, that last year, I was there for 7 weeks. During that period of time, I would literally have to drive out of the park to a little place on the road about a mile out, and I couldn't get phone service at the park because it was in a valley. It was called Hidden Valley, and it was in a valley. But I was watching when the church first started doing the video church, and there was nobody here but you and a few support people, because it was during COVID. And when I was there, I had to stay for 7 weeks, which was well past. I was ready to go well before that, but it was during COVID, and they had shut down travel across the country. Mm-hmm. And if I left there was no guarantee that I would be able to find a place to stop, that would even let me in. They were closing everything. And I was able to stay there. They said, if you were here when they closed the country down, you can stay as long as you need to. We won't make you leave. And so, needless to say, I was ready to come home that time. And I did, but I had to do it kind of sneakily, because you couldn't travel yet. Mm-hmm. So I was, I call it, I was in stealth mode, driving across Colorado and Kansas and Missouri and New Mexico and up through there. I took a few days to get back, but I did. It was boondocking all the way, because you couldn't get into a park. Mm-hmm. They were closed. Yeah. And but that's just a little feel for that. Yeah. It was exciting. It was a lot of fun, and I did it because I knew I wanted to before I couldn't. And I just felt I needed to do it. When I left, you know how well, you don't, but usually a father says, "Okay, son, you go into the world now," and he basically sends his son into the world. My son, I remember him to this day standing on the curb when I left that first day, sending his father into the world. And he was staying home, and keeping my home, which he did a great job at. And so that was, as far as, that's kind of the story of that. But it was challenge. Traveling alone, a lot of times, you got to have 4 hands, and 2 hands won't cut it. And sometimes I would have, whether my back would be giving me fits, or my knee or whatever, it was very hard for me to physically do it. And so I think it was opportune that after 965 nights, and Sam and Kelsey had already moved into their new home, I spent my first night in a different bed than I had for 965 nights. And so, but it was actually good, because since then I've noticed my, body's age. We're like old cars, right? And I'm not sure I could do it again. I still have the means, and I've threatened it every winter, and I'm threatening it again this coming winter. And if I do, though, I think it's going to be. I enjoyed the solitude and going on my own and being able to just go when I wanted to. But I recognize that I probably won't be able to do that again. It's probably a good idea to team up with some other travelers. And I have friends of mine that they're getting older. That would probably be a good thing for them too, and help them to continue to do it. But so anyhow, that's that.
Well, you mentioned Sam a few times, and Sam is still in his 20s, barely. I give him a hard time about that. But Sam he's a leader in the church. I mean, if we're being honest. And I bring that up because I'm curious as to what is it like as a parent seeing your child be leader in the church?
Obviously, I'm proud of him, and quite frankly, he impresses me often. It reminds me when they were young, when the kids were young, and we were in this church and everything. I too was very active in the church and did a stint on the board, and was involved in pretty substantial activities, and way too busy with the church. If you can understand what I'm saying, it can become a little bit consuming, and at the and things suffer because of it if you're too involved. And of course, as my kids were young, I was also a Boy Scout leader, so I was very active as a scoutmaster in a Boy Scout troop. And and I think about that sometimes with Sam. Sam will say to me, we need to get together, but I'm having trouble finding the time. And I think about this, and it kind of plays back into him as a leader in the church, okay? I remember when I was his age, well, or had a young family, I should say, because I started my family a bit later than he has, but in life. But and I remember that always busy. There's always things with the kids. There's always things with work. Everything with church, Boy Scouts in my case. And my relationship with my folks probably isn't as, I didn't see them as much as I should. And as I look back on that now, because I'm in their place, I'm doing what my folks were doing, because they were traveling, by the way, in an RV. Whenever they quit, they traveled for 4 or 5 years. So I'm kind of followed doing what they were doing, and my son has kind of followed a lot of what my life was like when I was a young family man. So fortunately, I remember that, and I remember that and you hear it from your kids. You know, I hear it from Sam. It just seems like I'm so busy with all the time. Don't worry. It's okay. I get it because I was there. I did that. And so coming back to him and his activity in the church, it's, I can't take credit for this, but I feel that he, you know, in a sense, he kind of took a cue from me when I was younger. He was a kid, you know, at home and stuff. And it's so important. You know, I don't regret anything that I did in this church. You know, the service and the different things. And I was pretty involved with the teens, just like Kelsey and Healer. You know, when we would go to Flying V to go to camp with the teens, for, you know, 5 years, I had 2 kids that went through that, so I was there helping out. And, you know, I can remember, not meaning to speak out of school, and I hope Sam's okay with this, Sam's toughest year growing up, as far as I'm concerned, the year that I remember as the worst Sam year was 6th grade. And he was very uncertain. He didn't know. He was at that terrible stage. And 6th grade is rough anyhow, right? You know, going from grade school into middle school. But after he made it through that, he sort of found his stride. And he grew about 6 inches. That helped considerably. But then it was at that point that I watched him, and he was very active in the church, started off in the praise team. But, you know, he now is still involved in the praise team, but he's working with the teens. And he's done his board stints, okay? And he's also, as I did back when I did a stint at a point where I was kind of worked with a group of people that were kind of the visionaries. Okay, where are we going to go? Where do we need to go? And I know that Sam is in that place now too. And you got a good one with him.
I would agree. I wouldn't have asked that question if I wasn't confident in who Sam is.
I'm very proud of him, and also, you know, it's going to be hard not to get a little emotional, you realize, but I'm also, he impresses me so much.
Well, as we think about your journey in life, and you've been involved in the church and other things, can you share a little bit about when you became serious in your relationship with Jesus, and what maybe you think holds people back from doing that?
Yeah. You'll probably have too much of a pause here, and you'll have to edit it out, because I want to say I've thought about this. When I was 17, I received salvation. And for a year or so after that, I was, you know, tried to be very, salvation was mine, and I knew that. That was my saving time. But I didn't always live necessarily a good life after that. It wasn't like that was the end all. So I went through life, didn't marry until I was 32. and started my family at 32. Um, we we went to church. We found a church that we went to, and we were pretty good about it, and we were friends with people in the church, and we socialized and everything, and it was good. It was good, but there there was something missing, and I didn't realize it. And Sam's mom is the one that basically she's actually a very wise person, but she's the one that said, something's missing, and we need to find another place. And I fought that. I was like, no, you know, this is comfortable. Okay. I don't fall asleep every Sunday. No, you'll probably want to hit that up. Anyhow, I was making a joke.
Yeah.
So we did. We went and searched. We went to several churches in town. We came here, and Sam was all my children. I'm trying to think. My oldest daughter she had already left our home, was got married and stuff. But the other two kids, they were still, in school and so forth. So we came here, and we went to other churches after that, but we came back to this one and give it another try, and I think at that point I recognized that this is kind of different. This isn't necessarily, there's more to it than being a social club. Mm-hmm. And during that period, they were doing adult Sunday school classes, and there was 101 and 102, 103. And a friend of mine was teaching it, and he was a very good teacher. I got a lot from him. And so I reached a point where I realized that okay, there's more to this than the social aspect. There's the spiritual aspect, and I was really looking into that and embracing that, and for the next quite a number of years, as we continued to come to this church, even after my ex-wife no longer came, we came. The kids and I, Sam and Emily came to this church. My daughter Emily, and but Sam, he stayed with it. I mean, he was connected with the youth group, and he was getting active on the praise team, and he was hard on it. And it's funny how things kind of go full circle. But I have a thing I want to kind of tie all things in my life into this next part. There was still something missing. I couldn't put my finger on it. I did all the things we're supposed to do. I read through the Bible a couple times in that period of time in my life, and went to Sunday school, and did all the men's things, and did it all, and was active in all the events, and led a few, in fact. But there was something still missing, and I really didn't find that until I was traveling. And what I found was a very personal relationship with God. I'm talking deep. You know, I don't banter that around a lot, but I have, at this time in my life, the strongest relationship, or the strongest, my relationship with God is stronger than it's ever been. And it's very personal. And it was kind of hard for me to come back physically into the church and start coming to church on Sundays again. But I love it. I love everybody here. They're my friends. I've known them forever. But I felt that, and it's important to me to do that, but that's not where my deep relationship comes from. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come from this church. It comes from, can't imagine how to explain it. I'm trying. So I guess I'm just gonna end it like this. I didn't come to church Sunday. I know this is gonna come out well after, but this past Sunday I didn't come to church because I had some things that needed some quiet time with God over. Family things, personal things. And, so I chose to, it was raining anyhow, so, and my Jeep was wide open, which is how I love it, by the way. But I stayed and I had my time with my Father.
I think part of what you're speaking to is that there's no formula to get to where you are. And so you're trying to explain.
There is no formula.
And so it's, in some levels, it's faith is personal. We all have benchmarks that have similarities, but trying to describe a personal experience theologically has limits because we're different, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that's part of you're trying to provide tangible examples for what you mean, but it's more than that. So yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it, and just the journey of this deeply personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus is not just about being part of a social club. There's more to it than that, significantly more.
Well, when you think about it, I got saved at 17. I'm going to be 67. My relationship and my faith has evolved in 50 years. It started then. It still is.
Yep. Well, and with anything in life, you can think of, well, if you haven't grown, let's say you look back 10 years, you've grown since then. So we should be mm-hmm. growing in our relationship with Jesus the same way we're growing in other areas of life. And so it's Jesus is not a stagnant thing in our life. It's
but it changes.
Yeah. So it moves, it evolves. It shapes us into who we're becoming, not just keeping us.
Well, who we are now. The thing is, it comes to where you are. Mm-hmm. I was in the high desert of New Mexico and had several moments that were just crying powerful. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't happen in New Mexico, but that was because I was still, you're right, evolving, but it comes to wherever you are. God, He waits on us, okay? But sometimes we have to just say, God, I can't. I need you.
Yep.
And guess what? Never failed me all my life.
Yeah, that's great, and he won't forsake us or leave us.
Never.
Won't always answer us the way we want, but that's a different
Yeah.
that's a different conversation, I guess. So,
Yeah.
well, one final question before we conclude our time today.
Okay.
Is there any is there anything about the church, not necessarily local, but just the church in general, that is giving you hope today?
Mm-hmm. I've thought about this one too. There is a lot of old members, and there's a lot of new members. There are some old new members, and the thing is that this church doesn't take that into consideration. My experience, especially today, is that this is a healthy congregation. I've met new people, in the past several months that are coming here that I simply think are wonderful. And of course, there's still the old friends that were here forever that are wonderful. Mm-hmm. And so I think that this church is letting God. We're following the Spirit, okay, and it gives me hope because I recognize and from a worldly standpoint that the world. I'm extending this longer than you're going to wish I did. One of the things that you were going to ask me, but didn't, was if I have any new hobbies or interests. And I've thought about that one probably as much as any, but one of the things that I've begun doing is listening to what's going on around me. Not just in this room, but I'm talking about in the world, and I'm paying attention. And you can't, obviously, I try not to talk too much about it, but I'm paying attention, and I'm paying attention to the world, Jesus, the church that is the Church of Jesus. And from a world standpoint, and I also have hope. Of course, I know the end of the story, and I'm not quite exactly sure what part I play in that. I'm not exactly sure. I think about this more often than not. What should I be doing different for Jesus? And I recognize, by the way, tough as it is, I signed up for corn to help with the corn today. And I know that I'm probably going to be poor help because I have balance issues and different things. But by golly, I figure I can probably bag corn with nothing else. But the point is with that is that I'm saying what does Jesus want me to do? And it's kind of, I think about this quite often. I thought about it the last time I mowed when I almost got caught in a major storm, which was just last week, by the way. But I'm saying to myself, I need to do more. Yeah. And even if it's just putting corn in a bag or sitting on a mower or whatever, and I'm letting God show me where He wants me to be. Gosh knows, I've told Him, show me.
It's a dangerous question because God's going to answer that.
Well, I'm not worried about that. But I'm listening. Like I said, I'm listening to everything, but I'm listening for Him. Mm-hmm. And I know He's not shy. He will tell me whenever it's time. Yeah. Gosh knows, He told me this morning, and I signed up to help with corn.
That's right. Oh, that's great. That's great. So, Kirk, we appreciate you being here today, to sharing your story and just the way God has moved and continues to move in your life. So we thank you for being here, a guest on our show, and just allowing God to use you today. So thank you.
Well, I'm out of my comfort zone. Okay, thank you for having me, and I don't think it went awfully bad.
No, it was great. We appreciate you. Thank you, Kirk.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.